that both of which careers were started after you were 40 years old. I mean, that's just an interesting observation, I think, and coming at these things, going into very different careers.
Yeah.
And so it can be done, obviously. Mm-hmm. And Kathy, well, this applies to both of you, but I'll ask you first. Is there an issue of when you are going back, entering a career after 40, and you haven't had any experience, a new career to you, and yet you're not somebody right out of school, you're not an ingenue, and how do you convince people that that you're the real deal when they're expecting maybe someone out of school or right out of training to be a priest? How do you do that?
Well, I was a little worried about that because I was coming from, my first career was in the computer industry, which is a very innovative, flexible, open-minded industry. It doesn't have kind of a regimented career development because it just hasn't been around long enough to develop a regimented career path. Law, on the other hand, is one of the most conservative professions, and I was really concerned about how I was going to do in this profession that is kind of known for, well, here's kind of the vernacular, that baby has to look like daddy.
I love that saying. You had said that earlier. I love it. It just says so much.
Yeah, hiring attorneys, managing partners, hiring partners, look at candidates for associate positions in law firms and really expect the candidate they hire to remind them of themselves when they were at that point in their career. And there was just no way that I was going to do that. So I entered law school with the understanding that I had an uphill battle. And I thought from day one, how am I going to overcome this? And the first thing I thought about was that I set myself the goal of finishing law school with a resume that already looked like I had a couple of years' experience.
Which is, you have certain rules that you set out in some of your writings, general principles, and that's one of them. You talk about starting with the end, envisioning what the end has to be, and so.
Right. Well, I knew I wanted to be a litigator, and I knew that courtroom experience as a brand new attorney was going to make me be a cut above competitors who didn't have courtroom experience. One of the things that law schools allow, and I took full advantage of this, is you can get credit, you can get academic credit for clinical experience. And so I took my required courses, but to the greatest extent possible, I took clinical experiences for academic credit instead of taking academic classes because I found
And what form did those clinical experiences take?
Internships. I did 3 different internships with district attorney's offices. I did an internship with a criminal defense firm. I did an internship with a free law clinic that Santa Clara University runs for low-income clients who can't afford an attorney, who have get into various kinds of trouble, not criminal trouble, but say, for example, they have a problem with a loan or something like that. So I did an internship there, and I worked with a judge for a summer.
And so, and Mary, did you? I'm sure you had maybe just as managing partners are looking at someone who reminds them of themselves when they came out of law school. Was this an? Did you? I mean, here you were. That's certainly the priesthood is a male-dominated profession. Was this an issue?
It certainly is. Well, it's funny because now ordination is about 50% to 50%.
It is.
But males are still getting a bigger percentage of rectorships, which is a priest that's in charge of a parish as opposed to an associate. And the pay disparity is still there between the men and the women who are in clergy for many different reasons. But there's no doubt about the fact that when we all graduated and were looking for jobs, people love young, handsome men who have 2 little kids and a wife. There is no doubt about it. And they always get, I shouldn't say always, but they get really great jobs. I was really fortunate in the situation that I came upon because I had said that we moved to California fairly quickly, a year earlier than we thought we would. And so I had a year to settle, and so we started attending St. Stephen's in Orinda. And I started to get to know people, and I volunteered there in a couple different capacities.
So they got to see you as part of the parish.
Right, and I had a lot of support from one of my colleagues, Tom Trutner, and he very, very supportive. And so for me, what happened is I used my contacts. And so they had called a new priest to be the rector, and he was very supportive. His name is Larry Hunter, and he was very supportive of my seminarian experience and was very supportive of my ministry.
So there were similarities, even though they're totally different professions. You did the volunteering, you had someone who was supportive of what you had done so far, and you, of course, had all the internships. And one of the other things that you talk about, Kathy, is about developing a network when you don't yet need it. Now, first of all, what does that mean, and how do you do it?
Well, I cultivated friendships, and I'm not talking about it in a disingenuous way, but I spent time getting to know law professors and professionals, legal professionals in the community, judges, litigators in the community, who I respected, whose work I respected, and who were doing work in areas that I might be interested in pursuing. And I got to know them, and I offered my help, no pay, on a volunteer basis.
In what sense offered your help?
When I did internships in the district attorney's office, I sought work. I didn't just sit at my desk and wait for the assignments to come to me. If assignments weren't coming to me, I went to the offices of the attorneys that I wanted to work with. Do you have any interesting cases you're working on? Do you need any research help? And not only did I cultivate relationships with people that later became references for me, I got to do some really interesting projects that other people who had the wherewithal to do an internship were not doing. So not only did I have a leg up on people who weren't doing internships, I had a leg up as compared to other people who were doing internships. And those relationships snowballed over time, because then I had this network already in the legal profession once I began working, and I'd see people in court. I mean, even as a relatively new attorney, I would go to court and see a lot of people that I already knew. And
one of the other things that you talked about is putting your efforts into results that matter, and I assume that means as opposed to results that aren't that. Let's talk about that.
Well, I was a mom. I had 2 kids at home. I had a husband. I had a household to manage. I had to be very careful about where I spent my extracurricular time in law school. I met the professor that was the advisor to law review during orientation of law school.
Oh my goodness.
And law review.
And you knew at that time that he was the advisor to the law review.
Okay. And I asked him about what kind of time commitment law review requires. And he said 40 hours a week. And I laughed, and he said, "I'm not kidding." And I smiled, and I was very polite, but I decided in that moment I would not do law review, because I knew that it wouldn't provide me the kind of payback that I would require for anything that was going to take 40 hours a week.
Sure. And Mary, did you have to make those kinds of choices? I mean, here you had 3 young children at home.
I did. I had two middle schoolers and an elementary school age children when I started seminary, and seminary was much, much more demanding than I thought it was going to be. And there's the academic piece of it, and then there's the formation piece of it. And I found out over into my second year that I just had to make compromises. I just couldn't be away from my family as long. And so the middle of my second year, I slowed down and I went from full-time to three-quarter time.
And
so I did my first year and a half of seminary full-time, and then I slowed down to three-quarter time. I think also one of the things that makes me different, I think, is that I still kept my life outside of seminary. Seminary wasn't all-encompassing for me. I still had relationships. I still had my husband and my children. I still had that kind of life.
So you were prioritizing too, and had to.
And just if I could say, and also I think that makes me a better and a more accessible priest, because I'm not just about being a priest, I'm also about being a person. That's
true. Now, one of the other things, one of Kathy's other principles relates to your letting people know about your personal accomplishments in the early stages when you're looking for a job or to become an attorney. I may have a comment here about how each skill that you now have will relate for the purpose of applying to a new job or career. How do you do that in your resume, using your resume?
Well, I have, for many years, since I started law school, made an inventory of what my existing skills were and thought about how they would translate into the practice of law. I'm a computer scientist by education and by experience. I'm very analytical. I was a computer programmer. I learned how to debug software. And legal analysis is the same skill. It's the same skill. So early on in my cover letters, before I had that much legal experience to talk about, I talked about my proven analytical training and experience and how that equipped me well to do a legal analysis.
Well, speaking of cover letters, you also talk about when you are finally doing a cover letter with the resume, how you have someone else check it, how there are certain words and phrases that you refer to that convey maturity, and how what I liked was don't apologize. And what do you mean by in 10 seconds by not apologizing?
Well, my husband actually taught me that one because I was a little concerned about the fact that here I am entering the practice of law late in life, and I'm, and sometimes that would be reflected in my cover letter, almost a tone of making excuses for myself. And he convinced me, look at how much you have to offer. Any law firm would be lucky to get you. Do not apologize. And gradually I was able to make that tone shift in my letters without his help. But it took a while.
Yeah. Well, I mean, the other thing that comes through is how both of you were so lucky to have very supportive husbands. Now, we could go on for a long time. There's so much more that I didn't even get to cover. But we've learned a lot, and I thank both of you for sharing your stories with us. And thank all of you for watching AAUW Connections.
Thanks for inviting us.
Thank you.